Hello, my name is Dave Lordan and I am on the education team of the Museum of Childhood Ireland. I'm not a historian, so thanks to the history team for inviting me to make a contribution. I did, however, do a history degree and postgraduate degree, so I now have written a lot on historical matters, and I do have some research skills, not those of the professional historian, but enough to be able to write some substantial articles and so on and so forth. As a poet and a storyteller, which is what I am mostly, I write from my lived experience, if you like, from things that I have witnessed in myself and perspectives that I have myself. So my contribution is more on the kind of literary end of things. And if you want to check out my work in general, you can find it on any of the streaming services like Spotify or YouTube Music or Amazon Music or Apple Music or iTunes or Tidal or Deezer or any of those. If you search for Dave Lordan there, you'll find my poems and stories and podcasts and so on and so forth. So my main interest is in the experience, like I say, in the perspective of the marginalised child in Ireland, of the excluded child in Ireland. I think we have emerged as a country, not fully emerged, but emerged to a certain extent from a period when there was basically a war on the marginal child, on the poor child, on the child of the majority of the population of Ireland, which went on for, I would say, from the 1920s until the early 1990s, at least, and is still ongoing with the most marginalised of children. Just some statistics, I think, which give an idea of what childhood was like in the last 50 years in Ireland, even as we were becoming a kind of a richer and in some ways easier country to grow up in. Since I was born in 1975, there's been 22,500 people have killed themselves in Ireland. That is something like 10 times the amount of people that died in the Troubles of the north of Ireland. Suicide, as we know, is linked most strongly to traumatic childhoods and so on. Since I was born again in 1975, 47,000 young women aged between the 15 and 19 have presented at hospital for self-harm. So 1,000 young women a year are going to hospital for self-harm. Overall, since I was born in 1975, 47 years ago, 500,000 individuals have presented for self-harm at Irish hospitals. That's 500,000 separate individuals, believe it or not. And 750,000 under 18s, that's children, have been forced to immigrate from Ireland, 750,000 children, because the country could not provide a decent childhood for them. So the overall experience of childhood remains somewhat an improvement on what it was between the 1920s and the 1990s, but it remains a deeply traumatic experience for many, 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 many children. And again, we are living with the legacy, the unresolved legacy of hundreds of thousands of children who were abused in the most savage ways, the most savage ways imaginable in so-called industrial schools. We are still living with the legacy of those and the other institutions. And while, like I say, while all of those issues that we talked about, mental health, self-harm, suicide, immigration, while they affect all sorts of people, it's well established fact that they affect the poorest, the most marginal children to a much greater degree, to multiples of degree. And because, the reason I'm talking about that in terms of cultural production and literature and so on is because although in Ireland, most high cultural production, we might call the poetry book, the page poem, the novel, the theatre, things like that, it's almost exclusively the preserve of the privilege in Ireland, of the upper middle classes, of the upper classes. So the collective trauma of Irish children, the marginal child, the working class child, the oppressed child, does not get really represented at all, and is a major absence, if you like, in mainstream Irish literature and all those type of things. On the other hand, of course, you will find plenty about these things in the singer-songwriter tradition, which is a much deeper literary tradition in Ireland than the book tradition, and which is a much more inclusive tradition, if you like. So we have, I suppose, still ongoing in Ireland. We have, we've three, I think, examples of how the marginalised child is treated and is excluded and is oppressed even in 2022 in Ireland. We have the CAMS mental health scandal down in North Kerry, where dozens, now maybe hundreds of children were, medically abused by the HSE doctor. This is part of an overall stoning, I would call it really, medical abuse, over medication, hyper medication of mentally ill children. Again, most of the ones affected drawn from the working classes and the poor and so on. We have the fact that the local authorities in Ireland refuse to spend even the money they get on traveller accommodation, so that traveller children are left on the side of the road. Traveller children are left without any kind of hygienic conditions, or without any chance in life at all, really. And that is still ongoing. It's no better than it was really 50 or 100 years ago. And then we have the children, of course, in direct provision, who are the latest version of the industrial schools, of the incarceration of the poor and the marginal child. So we have a culture of abuse, which is deeply embedded in Irish state institutions when it comes to children. We have a culture of sadism towards children, which is part of the Irish institutional legacy. The experience of so many children, in the millions, in the last 100 years, has been one of trauma, abuse, neglect and exclusion by the Irish state and its institutions. And again, there's a real big absence of representation when it comes to high cultural production, and a real absence of justice, and even admitting and apologising and trying to make some kind of amends for all those things. Even in my childhood, late in the 80s and the early 90s, sadistic abuse was a daily occurrence in my primary school. I witnessed abuse every day of the week, witnessing abuse is being forced to participate in abuse, and being forced to witness and participate in abuse is abuse in itself. That's the primary school. The secondary school, again, the culture of abuse was so normal. We had a teacher who, when we were first years, second years, and our male adolescent nipples were hardening, which is part of puberty, we had a teacher who used to squeeze them every day. I don't know why, but it was abuse, and that was considered kind of normal, and that was the early 1990s. So the things are very, very. Sometimes we think that all of these things are very deep in the past, but actually there are a lot of living Irish adults who suffered abuse and exclusion and all of that type of thing. What I can maybe do as a writer is to put on record, in a kind of a psychological way, in a kind of a moving way, in an artistic or an aesthetic way, which may, is complementary to the historian's approach, and working together, I think the artist and the historian, if you like, can very much give a wholer, greater picture of the experience of childhood in Ireland. What I would like to do is just to read one poem from my collection Medium, which is out in 2021 with Frontline Press. But as I say, you don't have to. I have plenty of. I write books, but I'm mostly a talker, mostly a performer. And if you're interested in my work, you will find it on anything like Spotify, YouTube, and things like that. So just to give an example of what I'm talking about, of what you might call the poetry of witness, which is dealing with history, if you like, and the experience of history and being in history, from the point of view of the individual and the experience of the individual, and that experience in a holistic way, mental, physical, spiritual, and so on. So like I said, this is from my second last poetry book, Medium. It's called To Love and Be Loved. To love and be loved. For a whole year, the master bait and taunted the child with the lisp. He taunted and bait the child with the lisp, until the tears from the child's eyes ran together with the blood from the child's nose, dripping from his little chin, staining and crusting his blazer and trousers, so he carried the news of his torture around for the day like a gown. The master bait the fatherless child until the child pissed himself at the desk and had to sit snivelling and humiliated in cold piss for year hours till home time. He bait the weeping child until the child developed a stutter to go with the lisp. Day after day, week after week, month after month, term after term, the master bait the child and taunted him, taunted and bait the brotherless child, until third class was up and the child limped out of that abattoir of learnings, never to return nor forget. Yet after many hard years and all but impossible struggles, this sisterless child grew up beloved, to love and be loved, and the master didn't.